And we are coming to its second part. In the first part, I will remind you what we were speaking about. We were speaking why cultural diplomacy and international cultural ties are rather important and maybe peculiarly important during the crisis, threats and uncertainty. We communicated with Walter Zampieri, the representative of the European Commission, and also we had the first interesting panel discussion with the participants of the representatives of International Cultural Diplomacy Institutes, who shared their experience of the organization of the projects of cultural diplomacy during the crisis, including the projects which they implementing under the conditions of pandemics, and also the projects which are implemented under the war conflicts conditions. And now, in our second part of this day, we will be speaking about the Global Soft Power Index. But before we begin our speech and speakers, I would like to name one more question for all of our viewers. Thank you everyone who answered the first question, what cultural diplomacy is, and now I'd like to show you the second question, the answer to which could be rather interesting, I mean the results. So we'd like to see what your voting looks like. What's your opinion, the opinion of our audience, our viewers? You can see at our screen the same QR code which you can scan to get to the website with the voting. Also, you can just input the website slido.com and to input the digital code you can see on the screen, and this is how you will see this question and the options of the answers. And in the comments for both of our streams, English and Ukrainian languages, we are leaving you the direct link onto this question. You can use them and leave your answer. Vote for the option. I can see that someone has already opted the business relations. I will name you the question itself. What impacts the formation of positive image of the state in the world? The options of the answers is history, internal policy, culture, sports achievements, business links, which had already had one vote, tourism and cuisine, and external policy. Would you please vote? It will be open up till the end of the forum. In the end of the day, we'll look at the results. And now I would offer you to come closer to our topic. The topic of the following two speakers will have our special guest communicating with us. His name is Steve Thomson, who is an inside director of brand finance. In fact, he leads the survey we already mentioned above, that's the Global Soft Power Index program. If you are working in the reputation or country image or within the cultural public diplomacy, you could have heard about this index because it's rather well known and popular in different countries, and there is the whole ranking conducted annually. This ranking defines how the soft power is powerful enough of this or that country. So the communication with Steve will be done by Mr. Oleksii Chuiev, who is present here today in this hall. Oleksii is a co-founder of Business 100 and a partner at the representative of RepTrak company in Ukraine. So I give the floor to Steve and Oleksii. Dear colleagues, hello. Thank you for the introduction. I thank Volodymyr Sheiko, who invited me here today, and in the beginning of this event introduced me as a person who is a fan or who's worrying about the reputation of Ukraine. Really, for 12 years I'm doing both with soft and power, because we are uniting the most influential and most respected Ukrainian businessmen. This is Business 100. And on the other hand, we are researching reputation of Ukraine, and we are trying to integrate Ukrainian business and to different events. For instance, at the beginning of this year, we all took part in Davos Forum, and I was present at the panel discussion with Soft Power Index presentation of the company of brand finance, and I looked how powerful it was for the whole world which is paying attention to this research, how the whole world is listening to this research. And for me it's a huge honor to be here today and a moderator to communicate with Mr. Thomson, and to help to understand all of you, the audience, and me, myself including, is it about soft or is it about power? Because Ukraine, as it seems to me, has both soft and has huge potential for the power. So, I would gratefully give the floor to Mr. Steve. Steve, please. You are the main character now at the stage. Your presentation, please.
Well, thank you, Oleksii. First of all, I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Oleksii, can you confirm you're hearing everything okay?
Tak.
Perfect, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to a really fascinating day of talk and insight really into the topic of cultural diplomacy. I'm going to talk about soft power, as you've heard, and hopefully you can see my presentation also. So what is soft power and why is it important? I think we will see this morning that soft power has a significant impact on the decisions that people, on organizations and governments make, and an impact on the outcomes and the success really of nations and its people and its businesses. I like to quote Joseph Nye, who is what I would call the godfather of soft power. He's the person really who first conceptualized this, a Harvard University professor. And as he puts it, soft power is a means to success. Now, of course, cultural diplomacy is only one dimension of soft power. But as we will discuss today, a nation's cultural vibrancy and creativity can make significant contributions to a nation's reputation and in turn its economic and social well-being. So I think the value of cultural soft power specifically has been recognized for decades, and we recognize it in our evaluations. And in our discussion, we will outline our approach to measuring soft power and evaluating it, and we'll share with you the highlights of our Global Soft Power Index. It's been fascinating for us to see the perceptions that different people have of different nations, their strengths and their challenges. And I think we're also learning a lot about the real powers and persuasions of attraction that different countries possess, as well as seeing who are the underperformers, perhaps potential to raise their game and deliver more tangible benefits to national well-being if they can improve their soft power ranking and performance. So very briefly, I'm not going to make this an introduction about brand finance, but I'll explain who we are. We are a brand evaluation and valuation consultancy. And initially, we were founded with the objective of assessing the value and economic contribution of commercial brands, classic brands of all kinds. But increasingly, nations are managing themselves and their country's reputation in the same way that commercial brands do. They now adopt brand strategies informed by research and other measurements to assess, opportunities to promote their nation, both diplomatically and economically, through mass communication and so on. So they are behaving in many ways like commercial brands always have. One of the clients we've worked with, for example, the UK's Great campaign, is a case in point. They're borrowing the techniques and strategies that companies like Procter & Gamble and Unilever pioneered over a century ago. And so as we extended our evaluation approach to nation brands. We began valuing nation brands in 2005, and this is now the 16th year. We will be publishing our rankings of the 100 strongest and most valuable nation brands. So this is something that we've been active in for some time. And so what we will talk about is, what we mean by soft power. It's clearly something that indicates a nation's strength and value. But what is it? Is it just the same as reputation and image, or is there something a little more than that? Why does it matter? Is this just some kind of vanity measure? Nice rankings, but does it really mean anything? We think it does, and we'll explain how. And how is soft power manifested? Is it through business and trade? No, it's more than that. There's certainly a cultural angle. There's diplomatic elements, science, technology, education. It has many facets to it. We'll share with you how we measure soft power, and in turn, which countries we feel are the soft power champions. Of course, I'm sure many of you would like to know how Ukraine fares in our rankings, and we'll talk in some detail about that with Oleksii, and I will discuss this. And fundamentally, again, these measures have to have some purpose. They can't just simply be, just a nice kind of league table to discuss at a conference. We should think about what nations can do to strengthen their soft power profile, and of course, then in turn, get those tangible benefits that will accrue. So what do we mean by soft power? So we put our definition here, and this was based after fairly extensive academic literature review, including obviously reviewing Joseph Nye's work. And this chart summarizes our definition. So we define soft power as a country's ability to influence and the preferences and behaviors of various actors in the international arena, whether that's governments, corporations, communities, the general public. And that influence comes through attraction or persuasion rather than coercion. So something that you are doing as a nation that makes you attractive. People want to know more. They want to visit. They want to buy your products and services. They want to come and study there, whatever it is. And we feel that this really pretty much sums up what soft power is. Now, many experts agree that soft power delivers all kinds of benefits for nations and its people. It's clearly worth having. So as Joseph Nye puts it, if you fail to incorporate soft power in your national strategy, it's a serious mistake. This is something that needs to be addressed from the very highest levels of government. And it generally is, I think, increasingly so. And the benefits could accrue in many ways. They're, of course, mostly in the international sphere in terms of very, direct benefits, which we'll discuss in terms of direct investment in your country, in terms of tourism, people coming to visit, including business and trade. Obviously, your products and services are more attractive to people around the world. There is obviously political and diplomatic influence. There are international partnerships to be forged and strengthened. Again, in trade, but not just in trade, in terms of medicine, in science, and education, so many different ways. And also in terms of attracting, good people to come and work with you or even in your country. These are all things where a strong national reputation, a strong nation brand, if you like, and the medium of soft power will benefit you. I think these are all very well recognized, perhaps often not considered quite so much is also the benefit even in the domestic sphere. In domestic life, strong soft power can deliver better outcomes at home. For example, by encouraging domestic tourism, the consumption of domestic goods and services rather than imports, and less tangibly, but just as importantly, making people better about their country. If they can see that the country is prospering and has a good reputation abroad, then people feel better at home. So the benefits of soft power accrue in many ways. And we can see these benefits very specifically. You can see them, very directly if you look at some of the examples on the right-hand side of the chart here. Examples, for example, into how Switzerland is a magnet for many global businesses and organizations, and that contributes directly to the prosperity of that nation. Now, of course, if you could say, well, they have a favorable tax structure. This helps attract people to Switzerland, but it's clearly more than that. A reputation for good governance, an attractive lifestyle, good workforce, good standards of education. These all contribute, and this is why people want to go to Switzerland and why organizations establish themselves there. But we could go beyond these kind of anecdotal examples. There is plenty of more of research, more empirical research, which quantifies the significant tangible benefits of strong soft power. So on the left, I reference one study, for example, conducted by the University of Edinburgh. It was sponsored by the British Council, and they showed measurable, significant benefits in respect to FDI, to tourism, diplomatic influence, and so on. And other studies have shown the benefits in terms of export volumes and value, for example. So this is not something that is just a matter of faith. There is considerable proof there. And I encourage you, if you are encountering some resistance but internally perhaps, that the issue of soft power is maybe not taken as serious as it could be by some politicians, then I think we can point these skeptics to the evidence that makes it very clear that soft power matters hugely, can contribute hugely to benefit a nation, and therefore deserves attention and investment. And let's think also too of the business angle of this. This is, really brand finance's DNA is to always remember the commercial and business impact of some of these things. And soft power has tremendous implication for commercial brands. Clearly, strong soft power can benefit any brand associated with a nation in terms of its, the reputation overall, or just in specific fields. Maybe it's science or creative industries, food, and so on. And commercial brands can, if to use a horrible English word, leverage a strong national associations and reputation to help them. So in terms of business strategy, there are obvious applications from soft power analysis and measurement to target, where is our country brand strong and has a good reputation, because maybe we can use that and target those countries where we have a favorable reputation and where products and services from our country are well regarded. We can also look to see at the extent to which we want to emphasize our national brand and heritage with our own commercial brand. But I think also importantly, we should look at the ways in which business and governments can work together to support each other in promoting their national brand. So that, the business community really should assess where it can influence and support government efforts to strengthen soft power and nation brand reputation, because they have a strong incentive and they will benefit considerably and very directly if they do that. And we can see some very obvious examples from this. A couple here. I mean, German car companies in particular, we see very clearly know that to reference the strong reputation that German engineering, German manufacturing has around the world, clearly is in their benefit. We see this, from Volkswagen. Audi is a fantastic example, in the UK, that this was a brand that sometime really in the 1980s really just basically said, look, we're not just a global car company. We are German, and we want to be proud of that fact. And we want to really reinforce this in everything that we do. So they started using, German words, a German tagline, even to British and other international consumers, to really just remind everybody, wherever they thought of the Audi brand, that we are fundamentally a German brand, and we bring all the good things of German engineering to our brand. But it can also work in the opposite direction. And I think Singapore Airlines is a good example of how a corporate brand can in some ways act as an ambassador for the nation itself. So Singapore Airlines has basically helped, to emphasize some of the strong elements of service and a well-run business, but also a well-run country, but then also bringing an element of culture and distinctiveness. They're not just a faceless kind of corporate brand, efficient, and will get you from A to B with good service, but they're saying something about themselves and something about their nation in the way that they position themselves. So there's really a kind of a symbiotic, a two-way relationship between nation brand and corporate brand. And I think it's, when these things work together, you can see how the nation and its institutions and organizations pull together in the same direction, then everybody benefits. So it follows really that governments and nation brand managers should strive as much as possible to help try and project a coherent and consistent national identity. This is, brand management is something that's important for a nation. It's not easy to do this because, the nation doesn't control everything about its country. It doesn't control all its businesses directly, for example. But, Switzerland provides a good illustration of the benefits of a brand management and brand identity discipline when you apply this to nation branding. So, again, the more in which nations think like corporate brand managers in this way, it's helpful, we think. So, okay, we can see the benefits of soft power, but let's think about how we evaluate and measure it. So we did launch in 2019 our Global Soft Power Index to complement our nation brand valuations. And today we'll share both the methodology, but also more importantly, the results. I should stress, by the way, that the results for each country are freely accessible on our dashboard. Please explore our findings and look out for the results also for this year's study, which we're compiling right now. We've just completed the 2020 wave in terms of the market research fieldwork, but the results we're only just compiling. But this whole program is intended for public view and public consumption. So right now the results are available for you to explore at no cost. Let's talk a little bit about the methodology. So basically, in order to measure soft power and determine, which nations have it, we needed some kind of framework, a model, if you like, which encompasses all the key dimensions of soft power. Joseph Nye boils it down to three elements. Culture, so he recognizes that culture is incredibly important, but alongside that, political values and foreign policies. We think it's a little bit broader and has slightly more dimensions than just those three. So our model is a little bit more complex, as you can see here. But let's think about our model and also how we went about measuring the elements within it. So in the model itself, we start first with three overall measures on the left of the chart, what brand managers would call key performance indicators, the KPIs. And we believe that these are important and useful indicators of soft power. So familiarity is a basic kind of entry point. If more people know about your country, its talents, its businesses, its resources, and its culture, then for sure, then it will have stronger soft power. You may do wonderful things in your country, but if nobody knows about it, nobody really knows who you are and what's different about you, then you're at a real disadvantage. So familiarity is very important. Now, obviously, reputation is also clearly important. For a nation to be attractive and a role model for others, then its overall reputation must be strong and positive. So, those two, familiarity and reputation, these are fundamental to any kind of brand, a commercial brand, a nation, a university, a football team. These are all important. But in soft power, we have the third dimension, which is the influence, the direct measure of the perceived presence and impact that you have in other countries. We think is also important because that's a great way of assessing whether you really do have power. It's not just about reputation. There's an element of power in there that says, do you really have kind of presence and impact on the world stage? And that's something that, some countries have it and some are really striving to get it. And as you'll see, that element of power certainly does favor big countries, richer countries in some ways. There's no question. Then in addition to these three overall measures, our desk research and research of the academic literature, I highlighted 7 specific dimensions, or what we call pillars, and these are shown on the right-hand side. And yes, culture is important. That's one of our 7 pillars. Joseph and I recognize that, and we recognize that culture in different ways, arts and entertainment, food, lifestyle, sports, these are all important and have a bearing on a country's soft power and overall reputation. But there are other things that matter too. Governance, are you a well-governed country? What's the business climate? Do you have strong businesses? Are you a good place to do business with? What about your media and communications? Does your media have strong impact and influence? Education and science, of course, that's important in the modern world. And, what about just generally the people of your country? How are you regarded? Are your people generally seen favorably, or is there a degree of suspicion compared with how people feel about people from other parts of the world? So these are our 7 pillars. And then in terms of our measurement, we conducted the largest market research survey program to measure how nations are perceived around the world, the biggest that's ever been conducted, and it's getting bigger this year. Our research program gathered responses from people in over 100 countries, including a survey of the general public in 87 countries, over 50,000 people in all, including Ukraine, including people in many countries who are rarely given a chance to voice their opinion. Some of the countries we did fieldwork in: Senegal, Honduras, Kuwait, Uzbekistan, Ethiopia. So we surveyed people in all these countries. And complementing our general public survey was a survey of 1,000 experts and influencers that we called specialist audiences. These are academics, NGOs, government officials, business leaders, the media. People who have a real understanding of how different nations are portrayed around the world and what's their influence and reach like. And in terms of their methodology, our survey rated 60 nation brands chosen for their size and likely influence. This was in our first wave. Yes, that includes Ukraine, and we'll share the results. In fact, for this year's program, for Wave 2, we've expanded to include the index to 105 nations. So our program's getting bigger. And, like I say, if you'd like to know more, check out our website or get in touch. And of course, measurement's only useful if you know what to do with these measures. So a reminder really of how to use the results and put them to work rather than just as a point of interest. Of course, the starting point is to use soft power measurement like this to diagnose a nation's strengths and weaknesses. What's your reputation like overall? Where are you seen as strong and weak? Are there particular areas where you need to correct, perhaps unfavorable or simply incorrect perceptions about your country? And that can be done perhaps via communication. So this kind of assessment will in turn help governments to set priorities to improve your global reputation through perhaps communications and cultural links and outreach, but also, if necessary, to change actual government policy at home that says it's not about communication. We've actually got to do something more fundamental to improve our reputation and performance. So, and benchmarking and accountability are important. If you're spending a good deal of money to try and improve nation brand reputation, to improve cultural outreach and links, there needs to be some accountability. Is this kind of investment paying off? Are we improving, in fact? And also to avoid kind of vanity projects that say, oh, we'd like to spend the money in a certain way because, a certain minister likes to do this kind of thing. Maybe that's a nice thing to have, but is anybody taking notice? Does it have any real impact on the reputation and cultural relevance of your country? Because if not, it's just a waste of money. And lastly, another key application concerns communication and education. In some cases, soft power may be constrained because of poor communication of a nation's strengths and resources. And what a wasted opportunity that is. And it's often fixable if you have the right communication strategy. But you can only do this with good understanding of what your reputation is now and which misperceptions need to be corrected. So let's just start looking now at some of the results. Who are the soft power superpowers, if you like? Well, here's, first of all, the top 16 nations of the 60 that we ranked last year. So this is our 2020 index was based on the research that we conducted a year ago. And you could see there that our number one was the US. Now, the US, in some ways, might be a surprising number one. But basically, I think we shouldn't be surprised by this. The US has considerable assets. Even in the Donald Trump era, the US has considerable soft power and is an attractive country in many ways. So the US is number one, a clear number one, by the way, because of its assets in many dimensions. In particular, as you can see on the right-hand side, it's number one in terms of familiarity. Everybody knows the US, everybody has an opinion about it, and it's very relevant to many people. They want to know what's happening in the US, and we've had perfect illustration of this, of course, in the last 7 days, where the world has almost been thinking about nothing else. And the US has considerable influence. Everybody agrees it has more influence still than any other nation. And when they're not talking about influence on the global stage, people are asked in the survey about their influence in their country. And people recognize that the US still has considerable impact on their lives. But it has many assets too. This is not just a case of the US throwing its weight around. People recognize many of the strengths that the US has in education and science, for example. In terms of its cultural impact, it may not be number one, but it's still a high performer. Lots of aspects of American culture, we have to say popular culture, are very attractive to people. It has still a very, very strong business climate, very, very strong businesses themselves. Its media and communications still have tremendous kind of impact. And people aren't blind to some of the shortcomings of the US. They weren't blind to the shortcomings of Donald Trump, but we must not underestimate the US. The US is more than Donald Trump, and both the general public and our experts and influencers can see that. Now, if we look more broadly at who else ranks higher in these measures, and we see this not just in our soft power index, but there are some familiar names and common names in some other measures of soft power. You typically see liberal Western democracies coming through very strongly in these kinds of assessments. Countries like Germany, the UK, France, Japan. Germany, as number two here, comes through very strongly with, again, very strong reputation for business, governance, and technology, very strong and positive player in international affairs, and very stable too, perhaps more so than the US, and basically has a lot going for it. Very, very strong reputation and a deserved number two in our rankings. And the UK also consistently does well in measures like this. And again, another example perhaps of a country somehow perhaps in a bit of disarray, perhaps politically, we might say, over the last few years. But underneath there is still a country and a nation brand with many strong assets. Where brand finance perhaps differs a little bit compared to some of the other rankings of soft power is the presence of China in our top 5. China for us does challenge the Western nations with a high perceived influence, increasing familiarity and relevance, and increasing confidence on the world stage. Yes, its reputation is not quite as strong, is not as positive as countries like Germany or France, or Canada, but the influence is undeniable. And I think increasingly some of its strengths in business and trade and education and science are being recognized. And this is giving China enormous soft power, particularly as it's really wielding that soft power by linking it to hard power and economic power, and really, if you like, it is throwing its weight around. So we're not surprised to see China up as high as it is in our rankings from last year. But as we'll discuss later in our discussion with Oleksii, that may not last this year with its rankings beginning to come down. And what about Ukraine? Well, Ukraine ranks 46. I'm sorry, it was a mistake in the chart. It's not 48th, it's 46. It's a similar position to other CEE nations, Hungary, Croatia, Estonia, kind of mid-table. Not to be not unexpected for us. It's not a bad place, but clearly there is potential to improve and come up those rankings. So we think Ukraine starts in a position where it can grow, it can improve. There are some challenges, as we'll discuss, but Ukraine starts in a position where it can definitely, it's poised perhaps to be able to improve and move up. There's certainly no reason why Ukraine can't be, up there, and move up another 8 to 10 places quite comfortably and be in a kind of position that a country like Greece or the Czech Republic can be in fairly short order, and at longer term there's potential for even stronger growth. A reminder, you could check your country's scores here. If we just link soft power through to nation brands, just in passing, where does Ukraine rank in our nation brand index? The position over the last few years has been fairly stable, really, between 55 and 60. The position has been improving over the last few years, just slowly but steadily, clawing back some of the position lost a few years ago. But I think importantly for us, we note that in terms of soft power, the ranking for Ukraine is a little higher, which is interesting and possibly indicative that that there is the direction of the nation in terms of its reputation is positive. Soft power ranking is better than the overall nation brand ranking. That's possibly indicating that the country's relevance and reputation are a little bit more positive, and that in turn, if soft power does have the impact that it generally does, then the nation brand should improve over time if this position can be sustained. But it's also possibly an indication that your efforts to promote Ukraine as a nation is having some kind of impact. Of course, it's hard to tell from just one wave of research, and we know still, even with a ranking of 46 in soft power, that there is still more work to be done, but certainly the position does have some encouraging signs there. Now, is it all just a matter of hard power and economic power? Do rich, liberal, big countries inevitably come through the top of these rankings? What can a smaller country really do? Well, this chart shows that actually, countries such as Switzerland, as we saw earlier, and Sweden can actually be soft power leaders, can be in the top 10 or 12, despite not having a lot of hard military power, not necessarily being the kind of country that, throws its weight around, but just has very strong reputation and very favorable kind of assets. And an even better example, perhaps, is Ireland. As a great example of a country that, not just from our rankings, but other commentators have pointed, really punches above its size in terms of its soft power, its kind of presence and impact on the world. And, really Ireland has seen the benefits accrue. We're not talking about over the last 3 or 4 years, but we're talking about over the last few decades. Within my lifetime, Ireland has really improved its position from being a country really with some significant economic and social challenges to become a modern nation that's, the country and the people can be very proud of, and has delivered very significant tangible benefits to its people over that time. And let's lastly just remind ourselves that there are many dimensions to soft power, and that means really for smaller countries an opportunity to think, okay, we can't necessarily be strong in everything, but maybe we can be strong in some things, and maybe we need to think about where we can be strong on some of these dimensions. If you think of it almost a bit like the Olympic Games, that says, okay, if we look at the Olympic Games medal table, yes, the US and China, maybe the UK will always be right up at the top. It's never going to be likely that Ireland or Ukraine or a country like that will be top of the Olympic medal tables. But we can win some, and we do win some Olympic medals. So maybe in soft power, we should think with the same mindset. Where can we be strong? Maybe it is culture and heritage where we think we can really punch above our weight. But I don't think we should think about just culture. Let's think about some of these other aspects where we perhaps have some strengths as a nation and think about promoting those. So, every power, we would basically say every country can aspire to be a soft power medalist. And this is something that Oleksii and I can discuss. Where can Ukraine win? Where should it really be targeting in terms of medal success in the coming few years? But we'll also, Oleksii, as I bring you in at this point, we can maybe think about some of the other things that we've observed in our 2020 results, the mixed reputation of the so-called BRICS countries like China, Brazil, and Russia, and whether they're maybe getting the soft power strength that they can have, but also some of the other facets of soft power that are perhaps a challenge for Ukraine and other nations. What's the benefits of cultural soft power? Oleksii, I know you'd like to discuss some of these with me. So shall we talk about some of these things together, perhaps? Sorry, Oleksii, I can't hear you.
One moment, unfortunately, we are still dealing with the microphone. Stephen, do you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Perfect. So, Steve, if I may, as a Ukrainian, I have one important question, and I think that you know what that question is. In your opinion, I'm more interested in the United States, which took the first rank, and Russia took the 10th place. You do understand the situation our country is now at, so for me it's a question. If we're speaking about the systematic approach towards the work with the reputation, with the image, with the promotion of the country, then we need to find certain benchmarks. We need to find those key points thanks to which we can create this leap. And I understood, as for the Swiss or Swedish cases, they have prevailing soft power, as well as in the US, they have hard power as well. But could you please comment on your opinion how Russia could get to the 10th place before we come closer to Ukraine?
Question, and I should stress that I think since we first published our index, we've evaluated the position of Russia, and we probably feel that we overestimated Russia's ranking a little last year. So when we come to publish our findings for the next wave, we do not expect to see Russia ranking quite so high. But nonetheless, Russia will still be in our top 20 for sure. And this is not because it has a great reputation. It's to do with the presence, really, that Russia still commands on the world stage. You can almost like it to perhaps if you walk down through a shopping mall in many countries, there will be some stores perhaps in that mall that don't have a great reputation, but nonetheless they're there. They're in your face. You know something about them, and they still have some features which are attractive to some people. And Russia, I think, is this kind of reputation that it has tremendous kind of presence still, and Russia still matters to many people, even if they don't really like it. They still take notice of when Russia does things, and that is a facet, an aspect to its soft power, really, just simply being noticed all the time. So Russia, I don't think, is a role model for anybody, and Russia will fall in our next rankings, but nonetheless, we have to recognize it still has a certain presence on the world stage in these soft power dimensions.
Steve, if you may, could you go on with the presentation about Ukraine? Fortunately, I've seen the presentation already. There are several more important questions I'd like to discuss with you now, and for our viewers to see that as well.
Yes, indeed. I think we can see that in this chart, we showed a number of things, for example, that how, for sure, if you can have a stronger reputation, it will always help you achieve more influence. And the lack of a really good reputation for Russia and China is constraining their influence somewhat. But for Ukraine, you can see on this chart, both reputation and influence have room for improvement. And probably at some point, the reputation of Ukraine as a nation it needs to improve. We need to do something generally. If I move on really to other aspects of the presentation, we have to remind ourselves that soft power is more than just reputation, however. These other two dimensions of familiarity and influence are important also. It's no use just having a great reputation if nobody knows about it, and if nobody knows anything about you. And importantly, this issue of familiarity is important. It's what we call mental and physical availability. Do people even think of your country? Do people know about you? Are you relevant to them? And these factors are determined to some extent by size. It's a lot harder for a smaller country. By your relevance, are things going on in your country relevant to you? Whether it's culture, whether it's media, whether it's business or science, something about you that says, I want to know more about that country. And obviously it helps if you're a near neighbor. So you're always going to have this mental and physical availability in countries close to you. But this is one of the aspects where the US is very strong. And it's one of the aspects where Ukraine is unfortunately not so strong. So it is something for us to think about. How can we improve our mental availability? It's something that smaller countries do struggle with. Singapore, for example, is a really good example where the soft power rank is perhaps not as high as we expected, even though it has a very, very good reputation in the world. Very well governed, a good lifestyle for its people, business and trade very favorable, quite a nice culture, but people don't really know about it. It's a small country, and in countries a long way away, Singapore is not somewhere they really give much thought to. So maybe we have to really think about where our international reach can be strong and where we have to be realistic about where we can improve our soft power. And for a country like Ukraine, this means, of course, thinking about, perhaps near neighbors or countries where there is some cultural kind of affinity, maybe parts of the US, for example. Before moving on to Ukraine, maybe I can, because we're talking about cultural diplomacy, of course. Maybe there's not time for a quiz here, but I'm sure many of you can think that, the UK has strong cultural resonance around the world, and British bands and institutions benefit. And the example I want to think about is this picture here of these four guys here. I'm sure most people know who they are. It is, of course, the Beatles. This is a picture that is over 50 years old, and basically, I would say in many aspects of British culture and British success, even now, owe an awful lot to these four individuals. But Britain's still benefiting enormously from just these four guys and what they were able to achieve on the international stage. And you can't manufacture this kind of success, of course, but it certainly can be an inspiration for the cultural benefits for Ukraine and your efforts to promote the nation. But let's, Oleksii, look at this issue of mental availability and relevance. And it's hugely variable. Even for a big country like the UK, we're much more relevant in places like India and Canada than we are in a country like Venezuela or the region of Central America. And for Ukraine too, you need perhaps to think, where can we be relevant? Where can we engage with people very easily? And where do we have to work a little harder? And you can see the results here in terms of familiarity. Of course, in Russia, Ukraine is a very familiar nation. In Turkey, pretty good too. But there are some challenges in places like the US and Germany. I don't know if this is a surprise to you, Oleksii.
Yes, it did.
Алло?
Yes, it did. It really surprised me. Could you come back to the slide now? So is it familiarity of Ukraine by Russia, right?
That's correct.
So look, as far as I understand, familiarity altogether is one of the most powerful drivers. And did I understand right that our key home task now, while we are developing the strategy, is to choose, first of all, our key benchmarks, and secondly, our key countries where we need to increase familiarity as soon as possible, and to develop the programs on the increase of soft power index?
I think it's inevitable that for a country like Ukraine, it's realistically, you need to pick, yes, definitely countries to focus on. It's very difficult for a country unless you're very, very big like China or Germany to become strong in every part of the world. If we're thinking about communications, advertising, cultural programs, the scale of these obviously can only be so big. There's only so much resource and investment that you can put in. And I think it's important perhaps to think carefully where that investment goes, and make sure that any investment is of a sufficient scale. So, if I'm looking at this chart, you would say, well, look, the US and Italy are in the same position, but surely the rewards would come very strongly in the US if we can manage to become more relevant and accessible to that country, because it's a big country, it's a rich country. There are probably more people with Ukrainian heritage and and cultural affinity there, I would think that the US would be a place where you want to try and improve. And whereas, Indonesia, it's a long way away, and I'm not really sure that it's somewhere where you want to push so hard. So definitely, from a strategic standpoint, think where can the Ukraine win, and where can you make more friends.
Steve, I would ask you, could you present other slides in a nutshell? Because I know that there are rather important and rather interesting slides more, and I'd like to come closer to the discussion and all of our viewers to see all the presentations now. Slides, because I've already seen them, but would you please show us?
Of course. So we can see that from a reputation standpoint, I've mentioned that a challenge for Ukraine generally is to try and improve its reputation. Now, I think here Russia is a reasonable benchmark because Russia does not have an outstanding reputation. You can see, if we think of what outstanding looks like, it would be a country like Switzerland or Canada, and Russia is well short there. China is well short there. I think it's got to be realistic for Ukraine to try and improve itself to the level at least of a country like Russia or Poland or China. These are realistic goals, and I think they are achievable for you. The problem is not so much that everybody has a bad reputation, bad opinion of Russia. It's in many ways the fact that it's unknown. Your strengths, I don't think, are well known, and yes, there have been some challenges. But I think it's the absence of any real positive message that is the real problem here. Every country has its challenges. Every country has some aspects of it where the reputation is not so good, or parts of the world where reputation is not so strong. But you need really to balance that out with to try and find some positive things. In many ways, start also that, at home in some ways, that in many cases, the gap between internal and external perceptions needs to be thought through. Perhaps people in Ukraine don't have positive impressions of themselves, but that's something I'll think through. Let's look at how people around the world think about Ukraine and our own view. And there are some definite differences here. First of all, the scores for Ukraine are not very strong generally. But in many cases, people at home in Ukraine think, people must, we are strong in sports, we have great food, we are tolerant and generous people. That's what people in Ukraine believe are strengths of Ukraine itself. But these are not well known internationally. So I say to you, if, for example, you feel we have wonderful food here, then we need to tell the world about this. And because I think in many countries, the UK is a perfect example, there is an openness to learning about food from other cultures. And food can be a great cultural door opener, I would say. Music also, where there is receptivity to this, but at the moment, the world doesn't see it. So I think there are definite challenges to try and improve on that dimension. There is definitely a need to improve in terms of reputation around the business climate, but you don't start from such a bad place here. And there are some areas of strength that you can start to build on. People believe, for example, that the heritage of the country is very rich. You do have a good cultural starting point here that you can promote more strongly. And of course, in 2020, visiting anywhere has been a challenge. But I think, again, that there is a belief that Ukraine could be a great place to visit that you can build on. But there are also some areas that I think where the reputation, both domestically and internationally, is not strong. And these need to be addressed, I think. So you can, use our results to think about where do we have some opportunities to promote ourselves positively, but also where we must address perhaps some very negative perceptions and assess, is it just perceptions, or are there aspects of our nation where the reality is we need to actually improve our real performance here. It's not just an image problem.
Steve, we've only got several minutes left, so I'd like to ask you, taking into consideration that today's current situation in the world, we cannot still travel a lot, but really, Ukraine has fantastic people, the Ukrainians, who are disseminated all over the world. They are everywhere. Could it be one of our home tasks? Our today's forum is about cultural diplomacy. Millions of Ukrainians are all over the world. So maybe we need to focus upon Ukrainians to become cultural diplomats of their own country. And through the people, with the help of the people, we could communicate with the whole world while we have such restrictions.
I think that people absolutely can make a big difference. And I think, yes, people, we think of people perhaps in terms of, cultural ambassadors and cultural stars, but it's not just that. It can also be, these ambassadors can be also in the world of business, education, and so on. So I think it's important that Ukrainians and people of Ukrainian heritage of all kinds and all disciplines recognize that they can help their nation by being a positive ambassador and a confident ambassador too. And I gave the example of the Beatles. That's a brilliant example. They more or less changed perceptions of the UK to Americans overnight, and still now, 50 years on, people from the UK are benefiting from this. So I think definitely the Ukrainian people can play a big role. It's not just the government.
Thank you, Steve. And I also have several questions from our audience. So, Steve, we would be grateful if you're able to comment. There are two questions, in fact, for you. First of all, is about Russia again. Our viewers are interested to get to know which indicators did give Russia such a high ranking. Could you share?
Yes, I think for Russia, the particular strength that they have is one of familiarity and perceived influence. Influence itself is one of the measures that we have. The reputation in terms of education is pretty good, and Russia's overall reputation is not maybe as negative as people think. If you look at the countries, there are 60 countries. The countries with a really, really bad reputation, right at the bottom, are countries like Iran, Venezuela, countries which are seen as, more or less failing states in some ways, barely a country at all in some respects. And Russia, whilst we may not necessarily see everything positive about it, it's seen still as a powerful country with strong resources, strong impact diplomatically in diplomatic circles. Governance, again, we may not necessarily, not everybody likes the style of governance, but it is seen basically as a country that is able to govern itself in a certain way, I guess. And whilst not everybody wants to copy that, I think there is a recognition nonetheless that, institutions and bodies are functioning in a way that enables the country to manage itself and to prosper in a certain way. But I do want to stress that I think we're going to reevaluate the position of Russia in the next index. So we will see Russia's place in the world fall when we publish our findings in the next month or two. Expect to see Russia come down a little bit. But the sheer size and presence and relevance of Russia is not to be underestimated. It still matters in terms of soft powers. We've always said that soft power is more than reputation, and that power has an element of size. So think of it in many ways like that. Like that fast food outlet in a shopping mall that many people say, oh, it's not a great place. Why do people still go there? But you know what? It's there. It's there in every shopping mall. And when they're having a promotion or doing something, a new product or something like that, people still go in there. And that's the best analogy I can give. That it's that sheer relevance and physical and mental presence in the world that Russia is still able to benefit from its position as a hard power over many decades.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much, Steve. And there's one more question, which I can't help asking. It's a bit longer, but it is connected with the first one. In the first dozen, among the liberal democracies, we could see two autocratic and non-democratic countries, Russia and China. So, how can we consider their efforts in the promotion of the national culture really distract our attention from the human rights violations, military conflicts, or neglection of international law?
Well, I think this is an important point. Now, Russia, we're very clear. Even if we were to take just the 2019 research, we would place Russia in a lower position. But China is a little different. For all China's challenges with respect to human rights and other aspects of Chinese society, it's not a democratic society. We have to recognize this. But nonetheless, China has now, I think, through a very vigorous soft power program over the last few years, has definitely established itself as a soft power leader. It's certainly not as strong as the US or Germany or the UK, but it is challenging. And it's challenging for a number of reasons. Again, it has that mental availability and relevance. But I think, unlike Russia, it is starting to show that it is offering very strong performance in a number of dimensions. Clearly, some of its businesses now are recognized as very strong and very advanced. We're talking about a brand like Huawei, for example, now, which is, genuinely a world, one of the leading companies in its field. We should also look at elements of international outreach and relationships, but also in terms of science and technology more generally now. I think China is recognized to be not just a copier, but it's beginning to be something of a leader in certain fields. Now, the world is not ignoring some of the reputational shortcomings of China at all. China will fall in our next rankings because its reputation this year has taken a very severe knock. We can see that in just going through the initial results from our research this year. So China will fall from 5th place, I guarantee that. But its reputation is not as negative as we might think. And that's particularly true when you start to survey people in countries like sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, even parts of Central and Latin and South America, where, China's human rights issues, if you like, people in some of these countries are maybe less concerned, and they are more forgiving about some of these things because they see how China has made great strides at lifting its people out of poverty and giving its people a better lifestyle, and they like some of those things. And they're not so that they recognize that democracy hasn't served them especially well in some of these countries. If you look at many sub-Saharan countries, democracy has been very fragile. Human rights is not so great, and they recognize that China has done many good things for its people, but we can't ignore, of course, the problems and the challenges.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much, Steve, that you both answered the questions and made such an interesting presentation for us. I personally following for several years on your researches and your ranking, and also I will interested in the results of your annual ranking. So I'm really grateful that you managed to draw some time to devote your time and to communicate with us. Thank you so much. And finally, I would like to ask Oleksii, in a sentence, or maybe in two sentences, to sum up how he considers, according to the results of this conversation, what should Ukraine do to strengthen its soft power. First of all, I would like to thank Steve from my behalf. You all know that now Ukraine is at the edge of the development of 10-year national economic strategy for the next 10 years, and it's rather important, it seems to me, to take these data which were done by Brand Finance, the new data, because we are living in a totally different reality, and to compare the reality which we had a year ago with the today's one, and to choose the proper direction of work for the following 10 years. It seems to me this is the key task, our key home task. So I'm really happy that we had such a direct communication with them. Thank you so much, Oleksii, for this conversation and for your discussion with Steve. By the way, as for what you've just mentioned, I'd like to say that we in the Ukrainian Institute have founded the ranking of Global Soft Power Index as well. We would like to base upon them, which Steve deals with, and other researchers, so we hope this practice to be among the public institutions, to be rather stable and to get accustomed to that, for it to become our norm, and we will form onto it, forming our medium and long-term strategy.